Hi, my name is Flores, and today I'm presenting my Restorative Community Health Toolkit. Social change is important to me. My parents are first and second generation immigrants to the United States, and growing up, I got to see what it's like to be both an immigrant and a person of color in the US. This prompted me to join many different NGOs and community-based organizations where I saw firsthand how difficult it is to achieve their mission and just to be a volunteer NGO in these organizations. Many of you are familiar with the issues I'm talking about. Difficulty finding funding, the struggle to create an impact on large structural problems, long hours and little pay. But for those doing racial justice work and identity-based social change, there's an additional occupational hazard, and that is vicarious trauma. I want everybody in the room to imagine for a moment that you are part of a marginalized identity. And if you are one, then what I'm about to say might sound familiar to you. Every day, you experience microaggressions, whether they're intended or not, and important parts of your identity are erased and invisibilized in society. According to current understandings of trauma, this is considered a traumatic experience. In addition to this, you might experience collective or identity-based trauma, and this comes from hearing stories of violence against people in your community reported on the news and social media, and hearing about it from your family and friends. So you go to an NGO to try to do work to combat these issues, but in doing so, you're hearing more stories of the same violence. You may also experience vicarious trauma, which comes from trying to heal people who are traumatized. So obviously in doing this work, you're experiencing a lot of emotional stress. And when people are presented with this type of stress, they form protective behaviors. At first, these protective behaviors are helpful, but over time, they can become maladaptive behaviors. And that happens when the stress and trauma is not reprocessed and healed. So in these organizations, you have people working in an unhealthy environment, and likely their organization is not reaching full capacity in reaching their goals. My toolkit intends to address the internal health of organizations and pave the way to doing this work more sustainably and in a healthy way. So I follow three main theories and practices. The first is restorative justice, then trauma-informed systems, and healing-centered engagement. I myself am a restorative justice practitioner, and what that means is when harm is done, we look to repair relationships and understand the impacts of the harm rather than take punitive measures. Trauma-informed systems is something that's very popular right now in social welfare and psychology, and basically it involves understanding, recognizing, and responding to the effects of all types of trauma. That's great, however, it is a deficit-based approach, which means that it's focusing on the traumatization and that stigmatization rather than healing, right? It's focusing on trauma as the whole identity of that person. And my toolkit is not about symptoms or trying to pathologize people as having this type of trauma or that type of trauma. It's about healing as radical as the work that they are doing. So healing-centered engagement comes in. It's a strength-based approach, and it advances a collective view of healing and recenters culture as a central feature in well-being. My toolkit does this by having a series of paragraphs written in layman's terms about this information. After these paragraphs, there's an activity where users of the toolkit can reflect on how this relates to issues in their own organization. After that, I have a series of culturally relevant resources, such as community agreements, community-based circles, restorative practices, and different practices that I've sourced both from my literature review and from doing interviews with organizations in the Bay Area. You can see an example here of community agreements. After that, I have a list of experts and organizations who can help implement these practices within your organization if you need expert facilitation, such as this example right here. And there's a QR code just to make it accessible, however you're using this medium. This is phase one of the toolkit. Phase two is going to happen over the summer when I'm going to get community feedback from organizations that are going to use this toolkit and tell me what works and what doesn't work. Additionally, I'm going to diversify perspectives by having my peers from the School of Social Welfare and Department of Ethnic Studies to help diversify what constitutes culturally relevant practices. Finally, I hope to have this toolkit published by the end of summer and have it available for communities to use. I want to thank my advisor, Andrea Dubrow, in supporting my research, and thank you to my NGP cohort.
How did you identify the organizations that want to take this? It seems like usually in these cases the first step is the hardest step to take. That's usually accepting that you have trauma or whatever.
Yeah.
So
when I talk to organizations, especially like those racial justice and identity-based social change organizations, this is something that they're quick to realize. Like it is difficult. Usually I don't use terms like trauma right away, right? It's more about stress of that work. But it's something that is definitely recognized in those groups, and they're happy to talk about it. Usually most groups say that this is something that they need, and usually they get outside facilitators to help when there are problems, but outside facilitators are expensive, and sometimes it's really hard to book them. They're booked far in advance.
Example of specific actions in the toolkit, like strength-based, what type of actions are that?
Yes. Okay, so the example I had of community agreements, this is actually community agreements that I held myself. This is a way of establishing values within your group, having perspectives from everybody, you hear everybody's voice. We actually did a community circle here in MTP at the end, so those of you in MTP, our cohort, you know what that looks like. In the literature, one example that's culturally relevant is I learned about Black witch magic. This is something that's really from community roots, and I like it because it's not a clinical approach, it's a community-based approach. So those are examples of some practices.